In Africa, when a baby is born, the father decides his name 8 days later. He tells the baby that the only thing greater than him is the sky, the earth, the stars, and Allah. The baby grows and grows until he becomes a boy. He keeps growing and growing until it is his time to become a man. Before the boy can become a man, he must go to a special camp to prove his manhood. At the camp, they learn how to wrestle and how not to be captured when white men are near. Their final test of boyhood is to get circumcised. In order to earn income, you had to have a job. Some jobs consisted of craftsmen, warriors, hunters, and traders. The Africans were always wary of the white men and did not want to get too close in case of capture. The people in the villages were well aware of the dangers of being captured. They knew they would be sent away from their homes and sent to do terrible things. But some of the first slaves didn't know what was going on. Richard Jones tells a story that his grandma told him. Granny June said that in Africa they had very few pretty things, and that they had no red colors in cloth. In fact, they had no cloth at all. Some strangers with pale faces come one day and drop a small piece of red flannel down on the ground. All the black folks grabbed for it. Then a larger piece was dropped further on and on until the river was reached. Then a larger piece was dropped in the river, and they led on, each one trying to get a piece as it was dropped. Finally, the ship was reached. They dropped large pieces on the plank and up the ship till they got as many blacks on board as they wanted. Then the gate was chained up, and they could not get back. That is the way Granny June said they got her to America. When captured, the people were locked in cages and chained. Before embarking, the captain of the ship would decide whether to pack loose or tight. Loose pack was where everyone was sitting next to each other, and tight pack is when people were laying on top of each other. Being a captured African, staring at the captain discussing the pack of the ship was terrible, because almost all Africans didn't speak English. Unfortunately today, we still have slavery, but the way people are captured varies. Some people are kidnapped, while others are tricked into it. You can be tricked into it by people telling you that they will give you a job overseas, and then they lead you to terrible slave conditions. The middle passage was really awful, because if you were in a tight pack, the people on the bottom often died of suffocation. The Africans who had infants with them, when they were captured, got their babies taken away and thrown into the ocean. The captured Africans stayed in the slave galley, which was normally very small. There was also a lot of disease. When a doctor came in to inspect the sick Africans, he took off his shoes because it was so crammed and he did not want to hurt the Africans. The only problem was the Africans scratched and bit the doctor when they could. The Africans were also forced to dance and exercise once in a while because they need to stay as healthy as possible. They were given minimal food and normally consisted of yams. Whereas sailors who shared their quarters with only 2 or 3 people, they also had a slightly bigger variety of food consisting of salted meat, yams, corn, and potatoes. At the end of their journey, only about a half or a third of the Africans survived. The journey was long and hard, but now the Africans must be prepared for the auction block. They are brought to a doctor to have their wounds wiped with antiseptics and their cuts covered up, for the Africans must be presentable so they can be sold for a higher price. After all the medical things are taken care of, the Africans are taken to cages and the men are covered in oil. The oil makes their muscles show more. When it is your turn to step up to the auction block, you are pulled in by your chains onto the block. Some spectators would come up and inspect your teeth and your muscles. Sometimes things were slightly worse though. Some people were stripped so that they could inspect every part of you. Your dignity and respect was gone. After inspection, the spectators would bid on you, and once you were bought, you were finally a slave. Life on plantations was hard. You worked for 12 to 14 hours a day, and you got your food rations for either the day or the week, and you got punished for working too slow or doing something wrong. You lived in a slave row, which were cabins meant more for animals than for humans, and all of your belongings were poor quality. You were given one set of clothes that were torn and tattered, one set of shoes with holes in them, and in your house you were given very minimal furnishings, dirt floors and leaky roofs. But you may do by making things in your free time of what little things you had. The days were grueling and unbearable. If you worked too slow, you were whipped. The whippings were especially terrible. You were stripped down and tied to a tree, and then whipped, each lash leaving you bleeding. The slave drivers were normally the ones who whipped you. Drivers were normally slaves, and they watched over the slaves for the master. Slaves' jobs were normally to collect cotton and clean it. Slaves would rebel to work by working slow and stopped when no one was looking. They also ran away, but that normally ended in death. Life as a slave was hard, and those who lived through it remembered it forever.